Hello and welcome back to Parley. This prompt was written by Lordrusty. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about straightforwardly pursuing excellent. Thank you, Past Sandy. Very excellent of you. Straightforwardly pursuing excellence in games rather than pursuing. We're gonna talk about the invisible wall parlay from Mr. Foot a lot during this one. At least I'm pretty sure those are the ones you're mostly referencing. We'll explain that a little bit, but first. Lordrusty begins, I'd like to request a review of the game 20 Small Mazes. It's free on Steam and should take less than an hour to finish. I responded that you can't request a review of a game for Parley. That still takes longer than 3 or 4 Parley, even if the game is only like an hour. But you agreed with me when I said that I also think I could talk about this following subject without playing the whole game, and as you pointed out, the Steam store page gives you a lot of detail. This game is free. You could go check it out. It's 20 Small Mazes. We'll talk about it a little more later. Lordrusty continues then. I want to use that game as a great example of things just doing what they say on the tin really well. We've had a lot of discussion recently about the invisible wall, pushing boundaries and subverting expectations. I think this is an example that maybe constantly trying to chase the boundary is a mistake, and we should just be making things which are really good at being what they are. Sure, so the idea is that this is a response, I think, mostly to a lot of Mr. Foot's Invisible Wall Parlay series, which is mostly about games that are pushing the boundary of what we are familiar with seeing in games for a reason that I'm not sure I can identify. And you're saying, well, but there's a lot of really good game to be made if you just do the basics really well. I completely agree. This subject has come up before in the Mr. Foot parlay as well. So in this parlay, I'm going to talk about it a lot. I'll use 20 Small Mazes as an example. I want to talk about what I think the difference is, because I don't think it's that some games are pushing boundaries and subverting expectations, and then other games are not focused on that. I don't think that's the difference. I think there's more to it than that, but I think you gave us a good example to work with. And I'm also going to give some thoughts about making games a certain way, or the enduring nature of, I don't know, making a game to be generally good versus like a response to things. I hope that will make sense when I get there. First, let's set up some premises. First of all, Lordrusty, by the way your parlay is worded, there's something that is on my mind, but I don't want to misinterpret it, so I'm going to tell you what I'm interpreting, and then hopefully that is somewhat your intention. And then if it isn't, you'll at least know that I thought this. When you say, I think this is an example that maybe constantly trying to chase the boundary is a mistake, and we should just be making things which are really good at what they are, I have a feeling that you're totally mincing words and mean if there's no clear reason to to explore, like the boundary of what's possible when we already don't have good things with what is clearly possible. And I would like to say that the Invisible Wall Parlay are not about that. They're not about it being good to do that. They're certainly not about that to me. Mr. Foot has mostly given examples that we've thought were interesting to discuss, like how the game is exploring the boundaries of what is possible in a game's narrative or structure. But it's mostly interesting because they're not doing a particularly good job, but they are still doing it. And so clearly the people who made that game or piece of media, well, they think that it's a good thing to do for some reason. And why might that be? That's what a lot of them are about. Or like, what does it do? Where is the potential there? Looking for a reason to do things that way. Basically, I wanted to clarify that the way you're wording this, it kind of makes it sound like you think we don't think this, but we do, or at least I definitely do. And I think Mr. Foot is somewhat on the same page as you. It's not that this is being discussed a lot because it's so clearly really good. And it's not, again, no offense, obviously better, in my opinion, obviously better to try to pursue making like a really good version of a thing we kind of already have. I think that is clearly more desirable, but we're going to spend the parlay unpacking what I mean by that. And I know Mr. Foot has actually pushed back against this a lot. So in this parlay, I am going to say some things that are my best attempt to understand what Lordrusty and Mr. Foot think, but I'm sorry if I misrepresent those. I'm doing my best. I'll try mostly to only do that when I feel like it clarifies something. So, for example, I think that a big point of contention between games that are trying to do something different just for the sake of being different and 20 Small Mazes, which we'll talk about more in a sec, is that the people making the games that are just trying to be different are not trying to make a game primarily for it to be fun. I think the topic of art compared to making a game, which could be something meaningfully else, is important here. So we're going to talk about that first, and then I want to get a little bit into like perspective and timelessness. I said at the start of the Parley. So 20 Small Mazes. Let's talk about that first, because I'm going to propose the difference between this game and these other games that you're critical of, Lordrusty, is not that 20 Small Mazes doesn't push boundaries and subvert expectations. The difference is that it does those things and it tells you it's going to do those things. And it does those things with a clear reason why it would be good to do those things. If it pushes boundaries, you know it's going to push boundaries to the extent that it will. And it only does it to the extent that it has a reason to do so, like a clear beneficial, let's say utilitarian reason to do so. There's a clear, like, more down-to-earth function, not an artistic benefit. We'll get back to that. 20 Small Mazes is, according to the Steam page, a puzzle game with 20 small mazes. They're good mazes, though, which is badass. I think that's badass as an intro to a game. This is a game with, like, it's a looter shooter, and you loot and shoot. It's good loot, though, is like, give me that. I'll play that in a heartbeat. I mean, if it's a live service, but anyway. And indeed, on the Steam store page, we can see from the short trailer and a lot of the preview images, we can see various mazes, 20 small mazes. For example, we can see one where you can fold the maze. You clearly can't get to the goal with the maze as it is, but you can press a button to fold it. Then the paths overlap in such a way that you can imagine you would then be able to complete the maze. Cool. There's an under construction maze. This one has blocks. It's all made of individually segmented blocks, so you can, with your little steam shovel, destroy segments of the maze. But you can only destroy, it looks like 4. It looks like there are charges of destructive power in your little bulldozer guy. And I can see, looking at the maze just in the preview, that you could make a beeline for the goal, but you would have to destroy 5 blocks to do that. So you have to do the maze appreciably, but you are allowed to destroy some walls. Interesting. Like a combination of mazing and not mazing. There's one that says gravity points down, and there's a bunch of arrows all over the place. I don't know how that works. Combination vault. There's a vault door thing, and some combination lock looking things. I don't know how that one works. That sounds cool. There's one where you are the maze, and you move the maze around what would be the little dot that is like your placement marker. So this is a good example for our discussion for 2 reasons. The first one is that it is not a game that is just doing the exact basic thing. It's not mazes, and it's literally just mazes. It still innovates. It still pushes boundaries. It still subverts expectations about what a maze would be to a lot of people. But it is open about the fact that it does those things, and again, only does them to the extent that it is in pursuit of making fun mazes. Not for any other reason, at least as far as I can see. And 2, I think it's a good example because it feels like a game that the person who made it just wanted to exist. They just wanted that thing to exist. It doesn't cost money. I don't know why this was made. It might have just been a demo or it could be a resume piece. It could be for their resume. Maybe they're trying to get a job in game development, and this is part of their resume. There could be any number of reasons. I could imagine it being a supplementary piece for a creator-related career. I imagine I will make some games on Steam that will be free at some point. I think that is a thing I will do at some point in the future. Yeah, so there could be various reasons, but the point is, it doesn't seem to be out of a desire to just make money, which is going to be important because I think that that has some overlap with the reasoning that people are making games that push the boundary of what's possible, like for artistic reasons, not because there's like any set benefit. But I'm going to go on that there is really almost no benefit a lot of the time. And the thing that I approve of about the 20 Small Mazes example is that there is a clear benefit. Lordrusty, I mostly agree with your premise that getting the fundamentals right is more valuable. Not because I don't think that innovation is interesting or worthwhile or more interesting. Mr. Foot has kind of argued in one of the Invisible Wall Parlay that they don't want just any game, they want weird stuff. And I don't disagree with that. But my main shtick is that it's not hard or special. It's not precious to specifically seek out different stuff to me. And really, it's the fundamentals that get worse. You have more to gain by focusing on the fundamentals. And in service of those fundamentals, in making the game fun, you probably will introduce new ideas that will be novel to the audience. And I would prefer that approach. I don't want a game that tries to be different just to be different and then almost inevitably gets the fundamentals wrong and is not a fun piece of media or doesn't accomplish any goal, but was pursuing a goal that could have been worth accomplishing if they weren't basically guaranteed to fail, which they were. I know that Mr. Fruit kind of disagrees with that from previous conversations, but that is how I feel for the most part. I just think that the proof is in the pudding. If you do pursue the fundamentals being good, you have the opportunity to make a game that will feel good, different, be successfully, interestingly different. Whereas if you don't pursue the fundamentals, it just won't do anything well. And so it is irrelevant what your goal was. You will fail, and so it doesn't matter what your goal was. Or you're leaving success so up to chance that I just don't think that's good. And this is true of a lot of games. I mean, I'm not sure that people disagree with Mr. Foot generally. A lot of games that I feel like get their fundamentals kind of off still do really well. And games that I feel like get their fundamentals right often get a relatively tepid response. Like people aren't as impressed by that stuff. So I'm not entirely sure what to say to that. But we are going to talk a little bit about art versus not whatever else we're pursuing. Because again, I think a lot of people who are pursuing these games that are just doing something different to do something different, the Invisible Wall pursuing pieces of media. It seems to me, it seems to me that they're opening their giant big mouth so as to say something that they feel like is worth saying, not necessarily because they think it will be like fun or good. I have a variety of complaints about this perspective. You know, I don't really understand why it needs to be a video game, for example. You know, why does Near Replicant, this is an example I used in Mr. Foot's recent parlay on the Invisible Wall series. Why does Near Replicant have to be a video game? Near Replicant is a game where, to my understanding from reading about and listening to synopsis of the game, I haven't played Near Replicant. I've played Near Automata a little bit, so there's some similar DNA there, so for what it's worth, I have some perspective. But from the example you gave me, Near Replicant is a game that is pursuing this idea that when you try to make things better, you dig deeper and deeper and you meddle, and it just makes things worse. In a lot of video games, there's a contrivance that things get better, the quest completes, and you get a nice resolution, and this game kind of doesn't do that. It does sort of the opposite of that. Now, there may be various reasons why you'd want to say that to people. You could be saying it to people because you think it would be a shock or revelation to them, which I politely don't think it is. I think that's a fairly basic thing to understand about reality. It's not that much of a revelation to know that if you dig deeper into things, like, yeah, it often doesn't make things better. It could be interesting to discuss at length why meddling doesn't make things better. But to my knowledge, the game doesn't cover that too much. That could be wrong, by the way. It's just an example. Anyway, or the point could be, well, it's a game. You're meant to get to meddle and go deep enough down the rabbit hole that you realize that it'd be better to stop meddling. This was the conclusion we made in that parlay. where maybe it's meant to be the intended end of the narrative that you quit the game before finishing it because you accept that you're making things worse by continuing to play at the end. That is pretty weird. That's kind of a novel type of experience. I think that has some potential impact. Now, can I give you a detailed account of what I think the concrete value of such an experience is, Lordrusty? I can't, no. But I am kind of with Mr. Food here that there is something there. I think it's interesting to discuss that. You could make pretty interesting games if you thought about that and then focused on getting the basic mechanics of that experience really, really, really good. You could make a really memorable, masterful experience that felt innovative and it had the basics down by having the experience of thinking of that idea, but then making a game that really committed to being a good game, and you delivered that experience. And maybe some people feel like that's what Near Replicant is. I don't know because I haven't played it. But I could see some merit in that. And I would argue that having ideas about what type of experience would be nice gives you a better framework for what the fundamentals are serving. Where's it leading to, or what is the point of structure, the thing you want people to experience. I do think having that balance of artistic sentiment and practical concern is useful and valuable, but I guess my problem is that to some extent, I think it, like in Near Replicant's case, it just doesn't work. Like, having read some people's opinions about Near Replicant, every one of them that I've seen except for Mr. Foots has been just praising the game for covering dark themes, which is either not a very interesting point, if that's the intended point, like that's not special or unique, or that's an immature thing to be impressed by, or that isn't the point of the game. So it either doesn't have a very interesting thing to say, or it failed to say what it wanted to say. At least to the people whose perspectives I've seen, that's not everyone. That's only some data. But to be fair, I sure was able to find a colorful variety of different places where people were saying that, from a 5-minute, Google free fall through the internet. So I don't know. I mean, basically what I'm arguing in this part for the beginning of the parlay is that I think if you're going to do one thing well, it's fairly easy to argue that getting the fundamentals better would be more valuable. But Mr. Food has argued in the past that it is more valuable to get the innovation better. Because if it's bad but has a new idea versus good but essentially identical to something that came before, like then it seems easy to argue that the thing that has a new idea is better. It has the only quality out of both of the games that has any merit, a new idea. The good game that is redundant is completely redundant, so there's no point. But in practice, basically no games are all one or the other. And I argue that if you mix them, you don't need very much of the bad game but interesting idea ingredient to make the game benefit from that as much as it can benefit from that. You would want far more of the get the basics right mechanic, in my opinion. For example, you can make pretty interesting games by taking an existing game and painstakingly slightly tweaking all of its mechanics to create a different feeling. This looks very similar to the game from before, but isn't when you actually play it. A simple example would be a game that has, the same spells that you see in every turn-based combat game. You got your Fyra, you got your Fyraga, you've got your Fyragalia, and whatever intense name, I don't know, are those names in one of these games? I'm thinking about Persona 5, okay? That, it's a bigger fire spell, and then you're going to have Bufa and Bufraga and Bufalia or whatever for ice spells. I don't know. I don't remember what they're called. Okay. It's something like that. You've probably played something like this before. It's like Final Fantasy, the way Final Fantasy does spell names too. And there are lots of games that have a structure kind of like that. And they'll have elemental weaknesses and status effects, and they'll be burn and shock and cold and whatever. You can make these games feel so different from each other and do things with that structure if, I think, you really engage with what that structure is good at doing, and then you have interesting ideas about how you could apply that structure to be good elsewhere. But once you have that one idea of, maybe you could tell an interesting story about, aggression and the way that people, choose right from wrong. Undertale, you could make a game like that using those kind of evolving those turn-based combat mechanics. It's not really like that, I guess, but I don't know. I don't have a great example, but my point is, you could think about what kind of story could be told well through that type of gameplay, and then tell it. But you would need much more of the ingredient of the fundamentals rather than the innovative idea. If it has a lot of the ingredient of the innovative idea, it's not gonna be a fun game. It just, if you suffer through it, you would get an interesting idea. If you have mostly the ingredient of the fundamentals, you can get your innovative idea across and the game will be fun. There's a bit of if it ain't broke, don't fix it in there. My counterpoint to the thing that Mr. Foot and I talked about in that one parlay, in other words, is that while I agree that a game that fully pursues novelty is more valuable than a game that fully pursues like redundancy, I would agree that the novelty game is more valuable. In practice, that doesn't actually exist. Like, people don't do that. It's a mix of the two, and it is clearly better in every way to put more of the fundamentals in. I think that is just beyond reproach, personally. I feel like when you deliver your interesting ideas in a game or structure the game differently, understanding how you can kind of bring it down to earth is the only way the game is going to be a coherent experience. And so I don't particularly understand why it seems like so many of the games that we've talked about in your examples in the Invisible Wall series don't do that. They seem to not care very much about that stuff. They're so excited about their idea that they neglect the gameplay to the point of undoing the idea. Like they remove the idea from the narrative effectively, or somewhat, because they don't care. They can't care enough about like the game just being fun. And I just don't really understand that. I guess my personal 2 cents as a creator is that I don't find it that hard to balance these things. Something I do a lot when I make Parley and videos is I get to a point where I feel like I have discussed the thing. I've kind of done the work, but I want to say more, add more, or do it again, or whatever. And I have to decide, do I do it again? Do I put in more of the indulging myself rather than the fundamentals, which in my case is like just getting more videos done or whatever? Because I know usually people other than me will like it, and it's just me that thinks what I made isn't that good. And I understand that if I were to pursue that further, I am sacrificing all of your enjoyment for my self-satisfaction or whatever. I just think it's pretty easy to be aware of that and understand that it just does nothing if you continue pursuing the self-satisfaction thing. I don't never indulge these feelings I'm describing to you. I often will, re-record a whole video, even though it's like kind of fine the way it is, just because I have some nitpicky, self-indulgent, doesn't really matter that much. But I have an argument that it does, but it kind of doesn't though, thing about the game, about the video I'm making. And I'm sure if I made games, I would do that too. But I don't ever really understand where people are coming from, where they seem to prioritize the vision of the game to the piece of media or art that they're making, literally to the expense of even making the piece of art. Like, even to the point of people seeing the piece of art, or them getting to see the piece of art, or people understanding the piece of art. I've simultaneously had 2 experiences, one of which is that most artists that I've met would rather someone not like or not appreciate their work rather than misinterpret their work and assign their own values to it. And also that most artists behave in a way that makes that happen more. I don't understand that. I feel like Near Replicant feels like a great example. It feels to me like because the game so strongly wanted to present this bleak reality, it didn't find a way to help the audience get it more, and thus indulging the creator, I can only imagine's desire to express this feeling caused more people to miss the point, again, or there just wasn't much of a point to begin with, I don't know. And I just don't really understand that. Now, it might be that I'm a soulless husk, and I don't have enough of a passion to make real art singing inside of me, such that I don't feel strongly enough about anything that I'm willing to literally throw it in the garbage. But seriously, like, think about it. Why would it mean you were more feeling stronger about something to want to just do it so badly that you don't want it? Or like the, I mean, if you just want to make it, that's fine. But if you're showing other people, the express purpose of you making it in these cases anyway is to show other people. It just doesn't really make sense to me that those same people like are the people who like just want to have made the thing. You know, why are you trying to show it to everyone then? Is it just because they want to get paid? Is it that Yoko Taro, I'm sorry, you're going to be our example. He just wanted to make Near Replicant that way so bad just for him, but like he has to, you know, put bread on the table. So he like let them publish it or something. But that, and then they had to put all these game mechanics in. I mean, is he going to play it a bunch? Does he want it to be that way to play? I don't know. Like, and then he didn't put in a bunch of stuff. He just really personally wanted it to be that every single quest is really depressing in the same way over and over again for the whole game, even though he already knows that. Why? You see what I'm trying to say? Like, that just doesn't really make sense to me. Like, he must have, it seems to me like he must have thought that was a thing worth expressing to other people. And therefore, it just does not compute to me that somebody would so strongly want to express that to other people, which I feel I've demonstrated it seems he most likely did care about that. Or you just like, it doesn't make any sense that you'd want to make this thing, in my opinion. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it does. I don't know, but that's what I think. And yet so significantly neglect like making it be good. I don't know, like, you know, feel effective or pleasant in any way, communicate more with the player. Again, I haven't played this specific example. I'm just talking about art generally. And the argument, the counter argument, I think, to what Lordrusty and I are describing, where you prioritize getting the fundamentals good, include your innovative idea. It will happen naturally if you're committed to making the thing like good or fun or scary or whatever the game is trying to be. It doesn't have to be fun. You will include things that are different. But when people commit so strongly to a new idea just for the sake of it being a new idea that all other conceivable effects of the piece of media fall apart, that just doesn't make logical sense. I honestly feel like you have to be a little bit crazy, like not obey causality, not be influenced by things to be a person who would make such a piece of work. It just doesn't make physical sense to me somehow. Again, I feel like I can think of lots of things that make sense to me. That's not noteworthy. But I can think of a lot of like beginnings of reasons. But as I go further, it stops making sense. I don't know. Again, maybe I'm just so unartistic or whatever that I'm not driven literally off of a cliff to slam dunk my work directly into the garbage because I care so much about the piece of work in and of itself that even if I want to show other people, I'm willing to literally throw my work into a landfill because it just has to be the way I want it to be. Like, why though? Like it doesn't. Who cares? It doesn't do anything at that point. I have mentioned a few times on Parley before that I had a poetry professor in college, and she gave us this little list of, it was called 10 questions to ask of a poem. And there were 10 of them. They were like, what's the occasion? You know, when is the poem taking place? What's the subject or whatever? And at the bottom, I wrote 11, what's it do? ? And I've had that on a little bulletin board with me since I left college for like almost 10 years now. And I think about it all the time whenever I make something or see someone made. I still don't accept that there is a good reason to share a thing you made with other people, but not have it try to do anything. No, like there isn't, that doesn't make sense. I feel like the explanation would basically be egotism. You made something just for yourself, but then you want other people to be like, look at me, I did this thing just for myself. And so that's the thing that it does, is show off. But the idea that someone would just make something, they're just an artist and they just make things just to make them. But then simultaneously, we see them everywhere because they are putting effort into showing them to us. But they don't put any effort into making them, like, accessible is not the right word here, but penetrable in any way, you know, like functional, basically. that just does not make logical sense. Like, there is no valid reason to do that, as far as I'm concerned. If there isn't an answer to what does the piece do, then there wasn't a reason for you to make it into something we know about. Like, why we either shouldn't know about it, that we somehow didn't know about it. That makes sense. Fine, you just made it because you wanted to, or it does something identifiable. Because if it doesn't do anything identifiable, and you took time to put it in front of our eyes, I'm getting all worked up here. Okay, we're getting a bit wound up. Yeah, then I don't see the point in that. I don't. And I guess that's my main shtick. And this was a fun parlay to do because Mr. Foot's parlay contains this idea. I did bring this up in passing in one of the Invisible Wall parlay, but we get to talk about it a lot more in this one. I still find myself slightly unable to discuss this subject, though. It's like I can't quite put my thoughts together as easily as I think I could. I think because to me, it seems so... It's a memory gap or a sort of a perspective blind spot. It's not a memory gap. Perspective blind spot for me, where I so strongly do not understand why you would be so motivated to do something so demonstrably pointless that I kind of can't easily marshal my logic to think more about it. I hate to be so harsh. Like, I hope I said at the beginning of this parlay, but I'll say it again now anyway. I don't think anyone is like awful or stupid or whatever for liking Near Replicant, or Yokotaro is like not deserving of hatred just because I don't understand his motivations. Obviously, I hope, right? I think the Mr. Fu parlay are really interesting, pretty obviously interesting. I hope that doesn't offend you, Lordrusty. And it might be worth clarifying that they're not about... I mean, I shouldn't need clarification. If you listen through them, they're not about this being such a good and worthwhile thing to do. It's, I think, pretty clearly not. But there are some potential benefits and some interesting outcomes, and it's interesting to break down how they mostly go badly when people try to implement them. One of the most flabbergasting aspects is the topic of this parlay. Like, why do people seem to care so little about, like, just making the thing be good afterward? You know what I mean? I don't know. So I relate to that a lot. Now, I do feel like it's worth briefly discussing perspective and kind of the enduring merit of a piece of work. Talking about the subject of when you make something and people really like it, it's nearly always in like relative to what's been made before. Or another way to put it is, if there were like 50 games just like that game, the impact of that game would likely be reduced quite a bit. This is not entirely true. There are games where there are a ton of games, a lot like that game. And yet, most of us agree that some of them are significantly better than others, even though, objectively, the pieces making up the games are quite similar. Like, the groups of pieces are very similar. Some roguelike gameplay loops, where you get random upgrades as you go, and they reset when you die to some extent, and modern roguelikes are basically, progression-based games too, where you generally get more powerful, or your ones have better stuff in them as you go. That's not what the core one was like. For a little while, the industry had an awkward growth phase where people said roguelite, but I'm happy to see that that's mostly gone away now, because it's not helpful. Like, essentially all games that do this do that. I haven't seen, let alone played, a pure roguelike, if that means you can have no progression between runs. I have literally never even seen a game that did that, except for the original Rogue, because it's not as much fun for the average player. Like, and so there's no point in having a separate term for that. Nowadays, that is what that term means. I'm happy to see most publishers agree and have given up on using the term roguelite, or games are tagged roguelike all the time and still have extremely prominent between run progression. But anyway, the point is, even though a lot of those games have quite similar pieces, we can all agree that there's meaningful differences between them. Some of them feel way more fun to us than others. And I think the reason is that, yeah, like, to some extent, they're just kind of getting it right. That combination of elements just has an enduring quality of good to it. And I personally consider this to be much more valuable than a quality of good that is just, it's novel, because it kind of wears off. Like, if it's a good idea to make a game about, X concept that is furthering what we consider possible in gaming, if it's a really good idea, then there will come a time where that's not a novel idea, but it is still an idea people like. And to me, that seems much more worth pursuing. I don't want the appeal that will wear off. You could always get more novelty. Pursuing making things more fun and more comfortable and stuff. I don't know, like doing things other than pursuing novelty will get you novelty. I love novelty. I love experiencing new ideas just for their own sake, way outside what Lordrusty I think you're describing here. I'm mostly on Mr. Food's side in the way I behave in my normal life, but I still wouldn't advise or condone people masturbatorily pursuing things just for the sake of them being different, because it's just redundant to do that. That's my main point. I feel like that will just happen. You don't need to go out of your way to make something that's like different for the sake of being different. If you try to make things fun in new and exciting ways, they will have novelty in them. They will have different ideas in them. It doesn't seem necessary to bend the game over backwards to be about this like new thing at the expense of all else, which is what I think it often is. And I think those pieces of media are very interesting to discuss, but not at all interesting to consider like making or consuming. Like, I'm really thankful that I get to experience a lot of these examples through Mr. Food, who experienced them, but I don't have to play a lot of them because I don't think they're worth the time for me. I don't mean to be harsh, Mr. Food. I am grateful that you played them and you enjoy them. I mean, that's great. You're the person who should play through them. But you will perhaps agree that, like I've experienced at times, your interest in them may be significantly academic. It might not be because they're all that good sometimes. It might be because you want to see how the game does that thing. Perfectly valid reason to enjoy a game. But sure, if I were to be my most critical, I would be surprised if Mr. Fu were to defend many of these examples as being like so good. Some of them really are, though. I mean, I really enjoyed, I can't remember the show that is about the guy who makes the example environment for people to practice conversation they're nervous about, and then it kind of bleeds over into his personal life. But I liked that. I thought that was very good because I think it wasn't overly hung up on being about literally only the meta aspects or saying like, isn't it so crazy that this is so meta? Like, no, that's just the story. And it just straightforwardly, maturely presented that story, not trying to act like, whoa, how clever am I? And I think that's part of why it was good, because it wasn't distracted by that. It just tried to be a good story. And the story was about a concept where things go a little far, and we sort of push the boundaries of what ethically I'm willing to agree that we should do in a show. There was that manga example that you showed me of him like writing a piece. The mangaka like made a piece of manga that was kind of a response to criticism about a previous piece of manga, fairly transparently. And in the manga, it's about someone making a manga and people responding in a certain way. And that I thought there was interesting discussion to be had there. And I enjoyed reading through it. It had gravitas, like it had emotional impact. It was ups and downs. I was excited. I was sad. I was entertained. It was cool looking art. Like, there were many things that were good about it. It was not different just for the sake of being different. It seems like it was different for the sake of communicating with the audience in a different way. But my point is, it's not like the point of the piece of media was difference. It was just like there was a utility-based reason to make things interestingly different, and then that was pretty interesting. I don't know. Maybe this is a giant nothing burger, but Lordrusty, you're the one who requested the parlay, and I'm happy you did. I had lots to say that I feel very strongly about, apparently. But ultimately, it might be kind of ridiculous to see me talk like this. I just talked at great length with a lot of emotion for 40 minutes to basically say, it's nice when people have a balanced perspective on things. That is good. Like, whoop-de-doodle-doo, you know? And I wish I had more answers for you, I do, about why on earth people don't do that. I just don't understand, comprehend at all. I want to, I will, eventually. I must know why people put so much energy into doing things in such an unbalanced way for, as far as I've analyzed so far, absolutely no possible benefit. I just don't, why? No. But it's most likely there is a reason, and I just don't know yet. So we'll have to keep looking. I hope it was fun to get frustrated about this with me. I don't know. I had fun with this one. Whatever. I hope people enjoyed it.